Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. For those of you here in person, despite the wonderful weather, thank you so much for bringing it and coming. For those of you online, thank you very much for being here. Um, Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to quickly speak on, before we talk about what we are here for today, I'm just going to quickly speak on the Harriet Tubman Institute. So the Harriet Tubman Institute of York University is home for research on everything Africa and African diaspora around the world. And so this is talking from pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial kind of the history, the rich history that we have. It's the one space that you get to discuss and write freely about the things that maybe if you had to say somewhere else, you'd look twice. Um, because it's probably not safe there. But here is a safe space where you get to do that research, and you get to discuss that research. And then while you discuss the research, we help to hone the ideas, just to fine tune the ideas as you go on. And so one of the things that we do here is that it is a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research that goes on here. So we have different clusters. We've got the labor movement and mobility cluster. We have the expressive culture and belief systems cluster. We have politics, economics, and social justice cluster, theories and methodologies, including oral science and digital humanities. We have genders and sexualities, health and disability. And finally, we have the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics cluster. So everything research that has to do with whether you're looking at science, arts, whatever it is, that has to do with Black people around the world, here is the space for it at York University. So at the Tubman Institute, we encourage partnerships with other ORUs within York University, organized research units. At York, we kind of have this thing with acronyms, so I do apologize for that. So we have partnerships as well with the Canadian Multicultural Inventors Museum, with the Harriet Tubman Community Organization, with the Jane and Finch Concerned Citizens Organization, with York University Lions, with the Network for Advancement of Black Communities, and the Afri-Canada Commerce Exchange, and also with the African Canadian Christian Network community. So we have these partnerships with other communities around the world. And so what that looks like is a partnership that pushes towards more research for people of African descent, so Africans in diaspora around the world. And so one of the ways that we push out this research is through our Tubman Talks. And so here we meet every Thursday, usually around 3 to 4:30. Since COVID, one of the things that came out is it's become more hybrid instead of just in person. And so what we do is we have very rich, engaging talks on research of our members around the world. So we have members from different continents in the world. And so this is an opportunity for people to come and speak about what they're currently working on with people of like minds in a safe space where you give an idea or you give a talk, and then there are other people around who would tell you, how about you do this? So it's like a really safe space for that. How about you look at this angle? And so it kind of hones your research and makes it richer. So that's one way that we do that. Another way is through our Black History Month, which you're here for today. Yay, welcome. I know I always find it funny when I'm talking about Black History Month, Black people, and February. It's like the coldest month of the year. Black people hate the cold, so it makes no sense to me, but somehow here we are, and you made it. So thank you so much for coming here. So for this one, we are talking about labor movements and organizing. And we have had, and this we want to say a big thank you. We have had a lot of sponsors towards this event that we're having here today and for the whole month of February. And so out of our sponsors, we have the Ontario Public Service Employees Union, OPSU. Thank you very much, Dr. Crystal. We have York University's African Studies Program. So we want to thank them for their sponsorship. We also want to thank the Center for Research on Latin America and the Caribbean, that's CERLAC at York University. Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques, for representing. The Dadele Institute for Global Health Research, At York University. Thank you. We'd also like to thank Dr. Sam Adam of the Faculty of Health, School of Nursing. So thank you all so much for helping to make today and this month possible, where we can actually talk about things that relate to our community, which is also transferable. I said it's funny in class yesterday. I teach a course on business and social exclusion, and we're talking about indigenous people. And my first thing was, whenever we talk about whether it's indigenous people or Black people, it's very easy for us to zone out and say this doesn't concern us. But one of the things you realize is that a lot of this knowledge is transferable, which is why we encourage this research, especially on Black people around the world, and Black history. A lot of it is transferable. When you think it doesn't concern you, you find out it turns around to, you feel the effect. So this is why this is important. So we will be talking today on politics and labor. We also have our topics on racial justice and labor. And then on February the 27th, we have community organizing, which is really what we're about. I'm a firm believer is no person is an island. You all need a community, a rich community where you can grow, where you can have discussions, where you can help, like we can help each other to grow. And so that's the whole idea. So today on politics and labor, we're going to be looking at, because when you're looking at labor movements and organizing, it basically is a way of tipping the scale of what capitalism has done to our society. We, especially in the neoliberal capitalistic situation that we find ourselves in, where it's all about extracting profit. I'm sorry, I'm not in class. The economist in me always finds its way out, and I do apologize. But it's about extracting profit to the maximum, and what that does is one of the variable capital that you can extract from is human labor. And so when that happens, this is me walking into class again. And when that happens, you need something to tip the scale, at least to balance it a bit, and that's where labor movement comes in. And so now we're going to be talking today on what labor movements have looked like, on workers in general, and how we merge that with politics. I had a student in class say to me yesterday, "Why do we talk about these things?" And I said, you know what? When you cry when a baby cries so much, you eventually pick the baby up. And so maybe when we cry so much, politics gets involved, and then policies are put in place that could make the world a better place and make it safer for people. So that's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about today. And then another way that you could we disseminate research or the knowledge from our research is through our journal. If you haven't heard of it, let me introduce it to you. It's the HTI Journal of African and African Diasporic Studies. If you're an academic here and you've submitted a journal, a post for a journal entry anywhere, who here has submitted and gotten one of those responses that just makes you not want to ever publish in your life again and tell you, what am I doing with my life? I am done. I am going to the private sector. This is it. Or I'm just going to be a stay-at-home parent. This is it. I'm done. Yeah, at the Tubman Institute, our journal actually is the goal of it is to provide feedback that is warm, in a way that encourages you to push out your research. We're not trying to discourage you, but we also want to push out the best kind of research. So you can rely on us for that kind of research. Yes, it was built with our grad students in mind to give them more publications, but it's also with like new and early researchers and even old researchers as well. It's a great place to publish. You can publish with your students, all of that. So it's an open access journal, and what we do is we put it through a blind review, send you the review, like a usual journal. So it is a regular journal. It's just we're nicer about it. We're kinder about it. We don't want to kill your spirit. We want your research out. So whatever needs to be fixed, we will tell you how to fix it in the best way possible. All right. Thank you very much. And with that, I am going to pass on to Dr. Crystal Garvey, and she.
Thank you very much on behalf of OPSU CEFPO to Dr. Rodney and the director of Harriet Tubman Institute. It's a sincere pleasure and an honor to be a part of this amazing event. And one thing I really want to share with you and take away with, especially with this being about the political movement and the labor movement, is this number 14. And this number 14 is a very significant number to me because of what I represent and the seat that I hold. But it took 14 years for OPSU CEFPO to even get executive board member seats for us to have a voice at the table. 14 years of activists going through the trenches, having to navigate racism, having to navigate psychological terror, having to navigate their voices being silent on every platform. But they stayed the course. 14 years it took. And now I can stand before you as the regional vice president for the executive board member, or equity executive board member. I know that's a lot to say, for OPSU CEFPO, representing almost 200,000 voices for the union and the labor movement. That just shows you the type of leadership that we have at the union. We've gone through a lot of changes, and we still have a lot of changes to go for with regards to moving forward. But one thing I will say about the union and the union movement, we are being intentional with informing, with empowering, and educating. Because many of the voices that are silenced and are a part of these labor movements are precarious workers. They're racialized workers. They're workers that are part of our LGBT community. They're workers that are immigrants. They are workers that don't have a voice. But we are intentional with giving those voices. So with that 14-year fight, now all these equity groups have a voice at the table. And we are making sure that these voices are being heard. And we're also making sure that we're paving the way and making changes. I also want to make sure to give, give flowers to many of the workers that have also put work into dismantling systemic racism. We've made it a mandate as a part of our equity board and the equity serving groups that all CEFPO members, so that's almost 200,000 people, must take dismantling systemic racism course if you're since you're a part of the union. So we go across the province we were actually in Thunder Bay a few days ago, quite cold up there. I've never been. And it's quite the experience when the cold gets knocked out of you. But needless to say, we were up from Thunder Bay right down to Niagara Falls. And we have boots on the ground going from all across the province, making sure that we're dismantling systemic racism and having those difficult conversations. But it's not only having difficult conversations, it's about girding and giving our community a voice of how they can effectively advocate for themselves and being intentional with creating safe spaces for themselves. Because if we don't create community and we don't create safe spaces, then what are we doing? We're silencing ourselves. So what do I say? We inform, we empower, and we educate. And the last thing that I really want to emphasize is that we take pride in supporting our young workers because the young workers are our future. And what we're doing is making sure that a part of this labor movement, that they understand the intricacies and the inner workings of how government works. The intentionality is not only to be a part of the labor movement from the outside, we got to be a part of the labor movement from the inside, which means we need accomplices, we need allies. And guess what? If we don't have those allies or those accomplices, we cannot move legislation forward, we cannot move policies forward, we cannot create and be the change that we're looking to achieve. So it's from the inside, from the outside, from the left side to the right side. But you have to look at the labor movement from 360 degrees. It's not one dimensional. And I cannot emphasize enough, it takes a community. I may be the voice, but there's a community standing behind me. The community that through their blood, sweats, and tears. And I always want to make sure to acknowledge them and pay homage to them, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be standing here. And then there would still be an executive board that represent only white voices, not the voices of the community of what we really represent here in the GTA. So thank you on behalf of OPSU CEFPO for giving us space and for being a part of this amazing event. We appreciate you. And thank you for the great work you're doing.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Garvey. So now we are going to get into our panel. So how it will go for also those online is, oops, I'm keeping my papers here. We are going to have the panel sort of reflect on a couple questions that we've sort of sent before. And then we will open it up for those in the room and also those online if you have any questions. I'm really excited to start this Black History Month with this panel. And I'm going to just introduce all of the panelists first. Let me just get my papers fell. So I'm just looking here. Okay, great. Okay, so first we have on camera MP Matthew Green. He was first elected as Member of Parliament for Hamilton Centre in 2019 and re-elected in 2021. Previously, he served for the 2014 to 2018 terms as the Ward 3 councillor and first person of color to be elected to Hamilton City Council. Matthew is honored to be the NDP critic for labor, critic for employment and workforce development, and critic for ethics, and the deputy critic for public services and procurement. He also services as the joint chair for the Special Joint Committee on the Declaration of Emergency. He strives to ensure that the working class values of Hamilton are represented in Ottawa and is committed to fighting for universal pharmacare, affordable housing, urgent action on the environment, racial justice, and the rights of Indigenous peoples. Matthew has a BA in political science and legal studies from Acadia University, as well as certificates in government leadership and social enterprise initiatives from Harvard University. So I'm actually going to introduce everybody, and then we can hold our applause till everyone is introduced. Sarah Jama, who's in the room with us here, is an independent member of Provincial Parliament for Hamilton Centre. Sarah's community work spans over a decade in Ontario and beyond, including running intersectional leadership, education, and civic engagement programming for youth, starting grassroots organizations to address various social inequities, including food insecurity programming and championing anti-oppression initiatives in her communities. Prior to being elected, Jama was a sessional faculty member at McMaster University and the executive director at the Disability Justice Network of Ontario. A well-known change maker, Sarah amplifies and creates spaces for young people by promoting skill building, knowledge sharing, and introducing them to community organizing. As a member of provincial parliament, Sarah brings her grassroots organizing experience and deeply rooted connections in the community to Queen's Park, providing platforms for disenfranchised individuals who are often dismissed. She encourages them to share their experiences, suggestions, and grievances at the provincial level. Next online, we have Sabreina Dahab, who is the Ward 2 trustee for the Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board and the first Black Muslim to be elected to the Board of Trustees in Hamilton, Ontario. Over the last few years, she has been actively involved in youth engagement and the fight against Islamophobia and racism in schools. She co-founded Hamilton Students for Justice, a grassroots advocacy group that supported students and families experiencing racism and discrimination in schools, and co-led the successful campaign to remove police from schools in Hamilton. During her tenure as trustee, Sabreina has focused on policy recommendations to address systemic anti-Blackness and racism, particularly in relation to how suspensions and expulsions disproportionately impact Black youth. Sabreina completed her undergraduate studies in political science at McMaster University and holds a master's degree in labor studies from McMaster University. Next in the room, we have Nicole Waldron, who is a professional event planner, inspirational speaker, author, community advocate, and host of the Victoria Speaks podcast and the Victory Speaks online show. Ms. Waldron works for the advancement and prosperity of her community, raising awareness on co-op housing, mental health, and other issues. She sits on the board of the Cooperators, the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, and the Ontario Caregiver Organization. Nicole serves on committees with the Canadian Mental Health Hospital, Stella's Place, and the Family Caregivers Advisory Network. Nicole was named one of the 100 Black accomplished Canadian women and one of 150 women in Canada by How She Hustles, Her Story in Black series. She is the recipient of the 2020 Brian Burke Community Service Award from CHFT, the Outstanding Community Service Award from Dance Carib. Nicole was also presented with the Social Housing Service Corporation Kathleen Blinkhorn Award for Excellence in Volunteerism. This is an amazing panel. Last but not least, Dr. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a philosopher of science with a practice in inclusive innovation at the intersection of tech, entrepreneurship, and big ideas. A member of the 2024 Task Force on the Future of Pedagogy at York University, Jean-Jacques is an instructor in organizational studies and academic program director of the Schulich Business Excellence Academy at the Schulich School of Business. He is also an adjunct faculty fellow at Dadalay Institute for Global Health Research and fellow at the Center for Research on Latin America and the Caribbean. In addition to his academic pursuits, Jean-Jacques leads a boutique consulting firm which has served a diverse clientele over the past decade, including a large national industry, post-secondary institutions, a cultural center, community centers, entrepreneur incubator spaces, tech startups, and a foreign government. From 2021 to 2024, he advised the Office of the Dean at the Schulich School of Business and Decolonization, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Between 2017 and 2019, he was inaugural technical advisor in innovation, science, and competitiveness to the President of the Republic of Haiti, and before that, spent 10 years in the Ontario Public Service, starting as an economist in the Ontario Ministry of Finance, concluding as investment attraction lead and senior management of life sciences programs at the Ontario Ministry of Research and Innovation. So I would like for everybody to give a very warm welcome to our panelists. What an amazing way to start Black History Month. And, you know, one of the things that I do want to say is that we all know we're in the middle of an election. And really wanting to say that, first of all, it's incredibly historic to have three Black people from within the community representing in one area in Hamilton at all levels of government, and really wanting to thank them for making themselves available during a very quick turnaround for an election. So wanting to thank them all for being here in different capacities. And just so you understand the connection in the family, is Sabreina is actually Sarah's campaign manager, which is why she cannot be here, why she is still in Hamilton. And so one of the things when I was thinking about this panel and reflecting on the work that everyone does, I was sort of reading, I love David Austin's book on moving against the system. And in one of the chapters, James Forman talks about Frantz Fanon. And one of the things he says, one of the first things that he says is that Fanon was a man of action, an activist, a militant. His life was engaged in the struggle against injustice. It is not just sufficient for the revolutionary artist to preach against injustice. He must become activated in an organization, in a group, in a political party, in revolutionary movements that are seeking to change injustices, seeking to bring about social change. And so I really think that when we think about all those who are sitting here today, who are either doing the work within a political party, as an independent, also within organizations and within the institution of school, we're sort of seeing how all of it culminates together to sort of push and move against the system. Man, these papers keep falling. Okay, I don't like being at this podium, so I'm going to go and sit down at the table. I'm going to just go and sit here, and I'm going to pass the mic along. So one of the first things that we wanted to really speak to, and I think particularly when we think about politics, sometimes there's a cloud over what we think about politics and politicians. And I think it's important to also situate who you all are within the positions you currently hold, because, as I said, there's a perception. And I think it's important that when I think about you all, you disrupt it in your own way. So I would like to know how these experiences, your past experiences, have informed your understanding and action for labor rights, and the work each of you do in your individual roles. So what I thought we would do is we would start with Sarah, then go to Matt, then Sabreina, and then Nicole, and then Jean-Jacques. So I'm going to just pass the mic here to Sarah.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. As Dr. Ruth said, we are a family. I wouldn't normally be out of my riding right now during an election, but Dr. Ruth is like my sister. She's known me since I was a student, so we go way back. My name is Sarah. I'm the MPP in Hamilton Center, currently sitting as an independent. I was elected in 2023 during a by-election with the New Democratic Party of Ontario. But my work started well before that. And as I think about my connection to politics as a young worker, my understanding of like the labor movement in this kind of role started back with my understanding of disability justice. I founded an organization called the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, and my understanding in terms of myself as a political person, an individual, started back in high school, actually, when I pushed for an elevator to be added to the Etobicoke School of the Arts. I went to grade 11 and 12 at Martin Grove Collegiate, and that school at the time didn't have an elevator for students to apply. And I met a kid in grade 9, a couple years younger than me. His name was George. And I remember him telling me like, oh, I want to be an actor someday, but I didn't apply to this school. And I remember taking a huge step back, being like, how could a publicly funded institution not have an elevator? Like everyone should be able to apply. And even though I had experienced like ableism, racism, this, that, and the other, I came from a liberal family that believed if you put your head down, you work really hard, you can achieve anything. And I kind of believed that, even though you're just kind of in this bubble. But this little white boy was like, I can't apply to this school. And that got me livid for some reason. So I figured out how to get myself downtown and into this committee called the Special Education Advisory Committee. It was like 6 p.m. Got myself downtown, which is a far way away, and just rolled into this room. And I said, hey, I'm here to talk to you about this elevator. And I remember the chair of this meeting, I always say his name. Sabreina and Matthew can attest to this. Every time for the last 6 years when I tell this story, Chris Bolton, he laughed in my face and he said, who do you think you are to be here today? You're not on the agenda. You don't have any speaking rights. You don't have the right to be here. You're not even a student trustee. And I remember looking around the table. It was similar to this. It was a U-shaped table filled with people who didn't look like me, predominantly like white parents who didn't have disabilities, who had the right to speak and I didn't. And for me, that was my first understanding of the personification of power. And that was the moment I told myself, if I ever found myself in a similar position, I was going to do something about it or say something. And so from that moment, I became fixated on trying to understand how power works so that I could disrupt it. Didn't know a lot else. Went to McMaster, got accepted into the social science stream and ran for student council there and got elected. And we were responsible for a multi-million-dollar budget. And I remember having the same problem of like, okay, I have a seat at the table, but we aren't really talking about police on campus or issues that affect my community. And I have this position. What does it look like to be someone who's Black and disabled in spaces of power? So I took a step back and I started to investigate movement work. And in learning a lot about myself and disability justice as a movement, the understanding that like our bodies and the way that we are able to function in communities aren't fixed, and yet Blackness and disability has always been used as a weapon of the state against us to divide a lot of us. Disability is unlike race in that it fits every race, religion, geographic location. We're all going to be disabled someday, but the state uses and abuses and disposes of people once your body doesn't function a certain way. There's no job that we can think of that doesn't disable you at some point in your life, physically or mentally. There's no person in this room who at some point, if you're alive long enough, won't experience disability. And I started to understand that disability justice is the antithesis to capitalism as a structure. Without being a communist, without studying the manifesto, I started to really understand that in order to solve the issue of capitalism, we have to learn how to not dispose of one another. And I started to look into how for Black people seeking freedom, your bodies were used and continue to be used as a weapon for the system to hold power against you. So looking at drapetomania and the ways slaves who were seeking freedom were psychologically like accused of having disabilities. And I'm thinking of like Abdi Rahman Abdi, a Somali man in Ottawa who was autistic and was killed by policing, and how half of the victims of policing are people with disabilities and how all of our struggles are connected in these ways, we will not find liberation removed from like figuring out how to not dispose of each other just because not all of us are going to be able to produce. If we can figure out how to value each other outside of our ability to work, then that's moving us all in the right direction around policy. How do we build communities that don't just like discard you and force you into a long-term care home because you're not able to work anymore? How do we build communities that take care of each other, whether or not you're able to work and function in the ways that we're told to as young people that we should be aspiring to? So I became really passionate about healthcare, the fight for protecting home care workers and fair labor there, the fight against the expansion of medical assistance and dying, which was expanded federally to say that if you are disabled, but not terminally ill, you can apply to commit suicide through the state. And trying to parse out the ways in which like people who are disabled can't find access to housing right now, who are living on ODSP and can't afford their rent and are forced by the state to be holding your hand out, are then told, okay, well, you're suffering as a disabled person, you should go kill yourself. And really trying to understand as a young person through my 20s how all of these issues are connected. My understanding of intersectionality as a Black person cannot exist without the fight for disability, justice, and liberation. And that has been tied into my politic. Like, it hasn't shifted at all. So when I became elected 6 months in, I had this grand idea that I was going to do all this work as a disability critic on health care, housing, and human rights. And that is not removed from like the ways disability is caused and used like by imperialist forces to like hold down entire nations. Some of the leading causes of disability globally is war, right? And our complicity through our military to like take tax money and go kill and disabled other people. So in watching online all of the people being disabled in Gaza, in my understanding as a student in terms of how our liberations are tied, as a politician, I could not just stand up and say bare minimum ceasefire. We need a ceasefire right now. So it's got me in a lot of hot water over the last few years, but I say all that to lay the foundation of like, as workers, when we're talking about labor, we cannot remove our analysis from like disability theory and liberation there. Here in stolen land here in Canada, but also like internationally, it's all connected to the ways forces of power use our bodies against us to divide us and treat us like our communities are really separate. Sorry, I'm on a tangent. That's how it's connected to labor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for opening us up. We're going to go next to Matt.
Dr. Ruth. Dr. Ruth, you done gave the microphone to politicians. If you think academics can pontificate, we can too. So I would like to know, just to provide, some boundaries for my remarks. How long are the interventions? 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
Sure. Yeah. And we actually should have said that from the get-go. So no. So it's okay, so that we can get through. We only had 3 questions because we know it's 5 people to speak. And I also want to ensure that this is a space that everybody in the audience also gets to engage. So I would say, yeah, about 2 minutes for each person.
Cool.
Thank you.
I mean, that's to say that I don't think you could have had a better introduction and framing for why we're here. And I would also go further to say that we're here, yes, as colleagues second, but family first. And my sister Sarah speaks for me when she lays down what our theory of change is and what our understanding of the power structure dynamic is. I just want to begin right off the top and thank you, Ruth, for this invitation. We've known each other for damn near 30 years. And I for those that are in the room who are being able to, take all the incredible value out of this, I can't imagine what it would have been like for me when I was in university to have a space like this, to be able to further explore on an academic side these theories and the way in which it interacts with their life. I did have the privilege of taking a class by Dr. Isaac Saney when I was at Acadia, and that comrade laid some gems of knowledge for me that became, I think, a deeper critical theory as I graduated. But I'm really grateful to be here today. And like Sarah, my politics don't come from theory. It actually comes from observation and experience. It comes from being in situations of struggle. It comes from having family, friends, and neighbors be subjected to the vicissitudes of capitalism and this kind of extractionary economy that we have. It's looking across the street from my office in 2013, running for city council, and seeing people line up down the road to try to get payday loans because their ODSP and their Ontario Works couldn't make it to the end of the month. Legislated poverty, state violence against people, keeping them in these positions to allow for what I think is an exploitative labor market that is by design. When we have a Bank of Canada that deals with inflation solely with using interest rates and causing, therefore, unemployment as a response to inflation rather than tackling corporate profits and greed, we know that the state is prepared to violently act in a class war against low-income earners, against workers. And so while I've done a bunch of work around anti-racism, what became very clear to me and why I wanted to be involved on the labor side is because I knew that, like, Comrade Fred Hampton said in the 60s, that any type of identity politics that were based outside of the fundamental struggle of class wouldn't lead to anything but this kind of liberal myth of meritocracy that continues to get perpetuated when you have individual Black success that doesn't actually dismantle the structural barriers that impact the rest of our people. So those are my opening remarks. Thank you.
Sabreina?
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Just turning something off that was making a bit of noise. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really sorry I can't be there in Toronto. I hope that at some point I get the chance to come out and see the Tubman Institute. Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about, one of the things I think about often is how our schools are microcosms, right? The things happening outside of education sector, the things happening in our community, the things happening locally, nationally, and internationally will inevitably seep into what happens in our schools. MP Green and MPP Sarah talked a lot about how capitalist systems and structures fundamentally impact our communities, and the very first places where people in our societies are taught to be only valued by their ability to produce is in the education sector, right? When I think about curriculum structures, when I think about education methodologies, when I think about learning structures and the structures of education, they are not neutral places for knowledge dissemination. They are inherently created for the purpose of building a generation of people who will be fed into the market, either as workers or as bosses. And so when I think about what our fundamental purposes when we enter these institutions, and as a school board trustee in Hamilton, and I'll talk a little bit more about what trustees do later on in one of the questions, but when I see our fundamental purpose in these systems is to be able to expose these contradictions, to highlight the process of what happens in these systems of powers, in these structures of powers, in these bureaucratic places that create the circumstances and the realities of marginalization, of racialization, and of anti-Blackness. When I think about the labor movement specifically and education sector, and I think about the trajectory of the education sector, one that is going to be privatized, I think about how the labor movement and students and families have been in solidarity to resist this privatization. And what has that meant? It's meant a deep understanding of the inherent intersection that working conditions are learning conditions. The better the conditions are for educators, the better the outcomes are for students. And thinking about those intersections, for me, I think also when I think about disrupting these systems and how we do that, it's about bringing community into the places where power is, where decision-making is happening, bring community and students into those tables of power. And I'll talk a little bit more about a couple examples later on. But what does it mean when we're at the decision-making table to be making decisions without those most impacted by our decisions? So at the Board of Trustee level, for me, that's meant bringing families in to delegate, to speak to the Board of Trustees. That's meant showing parents how to write a correspondence to engage with their board, their elected Board of Trustees, to be able to have these conversations. So for me, disrupting is about harm reduction and is also about exposing and having conversations about the contradictions in the education sector. Because when we think about the inherent, the very first superintendent of education in Ontario, Egerton Ryerson, believed fundamentally in segregated schools, in separating Indigenous children from white children. What does that then leave us? What kind of education does that leave us? And what are the foundation of the education system that we are dealing with today? So I'll leave it there for now. I'm really grateful and humbled to be sitting and speaking with you all with an incredible panel of folks.
So I'm going to try and stay on point and on task here. And good morning, everyone. It's so great to be here with everyone today. And so if I were to speak from, what has brought me into this work and where I'm at today, when I reflected on the question, I realized it started with my forefathers. My grandfather was one of the founders of the PNM movement back in Trinidad. And so it's in my DNA. My oldest aunt was the first female minister in that party. And then I looked back and I realized my parents were also my influences because they were givers. They was always helping somebody. And then when you come from a family where your grandparents had 15 children and everybody's giving, you just live in a country where you see yourself. And so I grew up around servanthood and leadership with integrity. And then I came to Canada in 1988 and, met great people like Joan Pierre and stuff who were, in the movement of Caravana and Carnival and making sure our culture was here and understanding the beauty of our culture coming from Trinidad, that it migrated over here. And then one day my mom found this place called a co-op. And we moved into a co-op housing. And that set me on a journey. It set me on a journey of advocacy. I didn't know what the heck co-op housing was. And it really is the answer to capitalism. Co-op housing and co-ops, I wouldn't say co-op housing, but cooperatives around the world, what co-ops do and the impact that they have really became an answer and a differentiator about capitalism. And so getting involved from a volunteer level really put me in the role of advocacy. And then life happens, right? Life starts lifing. And volunteering and learning about the movement and getting involved and realizing, because I've always believed and operated from a humanitarian level. And everyone should have a safe and affordable place to call home. And co-op housing provided that. It also provided community, because the difference between it and TCHC was it's not just about subsidy. There are people who are on subsidy and there are people on market rent. But when I moved into my co-op, there were families. We were doing things together, and I can go to the dock and say, can I have some sugar? And you saw community involved in housing. You saw leaders being built. And when I look at the co-op housing movement, which is my grassroots of advocacy here in Canada, I just moved and moved and saw and saw. Like we've had like diversity scholarships and investing in our youth and investing in our people. And that, not knowing what I was in for, then I became the first Black president for co-op housing in Canada. But that wasn't why I started. I just was doing advocacy and feeding a need that was passionate inside of me. And as I was doing this work and living my life and seeing my friends, I got involved in violence against women and that activism there. And even being, I don't want to say victim, but being a person who was affected in a way that would either be verbally abusive from partners, understanding and working in a shelter and seeing how women were treated and children and having to flee their homes, and working with Dr. Roz Roach, who is the first woman to own a VAW, a Black woman in Canada, and watching her raise the money to make sure that women and families had a place to call home and transition and build them up. And she doesn't even call it a shelter, she calls it a healing center. So you see the difference. And moving from that into, working and galvanizing and seeing the necessity for advocacy, because housing, going and meeting with parliamentarians and advocating and speaking truth to power. And, people say, Nicole, why don't you run for politics? I'm like, no. There's a role for politicians. When I look at Matthew and Sarah, I'm like, I respect them so much because what they have to do and go through. But then there are those of us that need to be advocates on the ground, empowering each other and empowering ourselves and being a voice. And everybody has a voice because everybody has a story. And this is when labor and advocacy and politics start coming together, because we're all living and we all are working. And then when I looked at that, you know, and moving through my life, meeting friends with sickle cell and becoming an advocate in the sickle cell movement, because as I learn for myself, as I go through a challenge, I ask myself, what is the opportunity in the crisis? And then I look at people like Doc, I'm looking at her right now. And I feel like, you know, I'm sitting here, I can feel the power of our ancestors. I've been sitting here trying not to cry because from the time, Dr. Ruth, you did the land acknowledgement, I feel, especially in this time, and especially when we think about what's happening across the border, the shoulders of the people that we stand on. Those that took literal, we're taking the whips on our back in a different way, but they physically took the whips on their backs. You know, every time, I can't even look, I want to look at the brochure, but every time I look at the brochure, I feel the presence of what Harriet Tubman did time and time again. So as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking about my journey, we see how we intersect and why we must be voices, and how my life has happened and connecting the dots in our lives of being natural advocates no matter who we are. Then I got catapulted into the mental health advocacy place when my son was in a bicycle accident 9 years ago. And now I'm a mental health family caregiver advocate. And that has put me in spaces I never thought I would be in. But understanding the connections, and I encourage everybody who listens to this conversation, connect the dots in your life. Because being in housing and then seeing mental health and that work, how it's now coming together for me and in what I do. And then as I sit now, the work that I did in housing and mental health has brought me into being the first Black woman to be on the board of cooperators in their now 80-year history and getting there. It was not a goal, but it was because I was not working for money. I was working for cause and working as an advocate. So as we have this conversation, we're all great in who we are. We all have something to say and a place to serve. And so hopefully we can all glean from each other, learn from each other. And I'm going to pass it over to the great Doc to my left. I'm going to take this mic off so he can do his stuff. He's so gentle and humble.
You know, like when your GPS doesn't connect with a satellite, so you keep recalibrating? That's how I feel. I'm so happy I'm last. So Tamika did not prepare me for this. In undergrad, I used to hang out with Marxist-Leninists, but I was never a member, right? And I'll tell you why. Because I'm an advocate for excellent scholarship, for good governance, and for outcome-based policy, right? And the role that I've played in the last decades has been one of an advisor, right? So I advised a deputy minister in Ontario. I advised a president in Haiti. And yeah, I advised the dean here, but who cares, right? So really, this is different scales, right? And the issues of rights, responsibilities, freedom, these issues are, like I'm a philosopher, right? These issues have been debated across cultures, across time, but I come from a very specific tradition in terms of my own scholarship. So this is the issues that were discussed around German idealism, like Immanuel Kant, Hegel, and his disciple, Karl Marx, who said, I'm gonna turn Hegel back on his feet, right? So I think like when I'm hearing the speakers and I'm accepting everything, because you know, we're family, so families disagree, yeah? And we're just not here to say the same thing, right? I'm wondering how we can do something together that leaves enough room for the differences that we represent, right? Like, I remember being in the Ontario government, 10 years I spent there as an economist, and then eventually doing, I don't know where you got that CV. Do I have that up in one place? It seemed like different places, but it's all true, right? And I remember a group of us went to meet this continental African group, right? So we're all Caribbean people. And we said, and we didn't say it this way, but we said, we're going to come solve your problem. We didn't say it this way, right? But that's what we felt. We felt we're going to come and we're going to solve your problem because we're Black, you're Black. There's just one Black problem, right? So let me just come and help you solve your problem, right? Because we've been here longer. So we started telling them about how smart we are. We thought about stuff. And, they very politely, they listened to us. And they were like, yeah, these are not our issues, right? They're not our issues. And so I think our challenge in all the diversity, and not Black community is a diversity of diversities. And if we limited ourselves to that, we would be impoverished, right? So we have to figure out a way to articulate our principles clearly enough that we create room for us to deal with our differences. We don't all have the same objectives, right? And therefore, we don't all want the same things, and we can't all we don't see the same problems, right? So forget that we have different solutions. We don't even see the same problems, right? I'm hearing my colleagues speak, and I agree with everyone, but I see different problems, right? And so hopefully in our dialogue today, as we learn from you and from each other, right? Also, let's not have a groupthink, right? Let's not feel like we all have to agree, right? Actually, what would be amazing is to feel the full depth of the resource in this group, in person and online, to know that even if I have a problem that's different from what's being talked about, I know who to go to or how to approach it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, I'm a philosopher, but let me try to be specific, right? So I think that I'll pick on something. I'll pick on something, right? So the Bank of Canada doesn't have the role to ensure that corporations do something other that they do, right? Their instrument of dealing with inflation, with interest rate, decisions is what they do. But I'm picking on this not to, I'm smart and I know something, or I think I know. So that's not the point. So if we wanted to know, if our discussion was about, well, we want to make sure that there is a system where we can have access to the resources across individual and corporate tax bases, right? Well, first we have to understand how the system works, right? And then we have to calibrate that understanding to what is it that we'd like. Is that specific enough? A little bit? We're going to get more specific as we talk, right?
I can't wait to get specific on that topic, my brother.
But and that's cool, right? But I was forced to pick something, right? But I want to share. But I want to share. I love debate and stuff, but it's not really what I'm here to do, right? I'm here to learn, right? And I just want us to create enough space, right? Like, we don't all have to agree on a very, very narrow set of issues. We don't have to. But I think the thing to agree on is that within our diverse communities, we are committed in solidarity to uplifting each other. I think that's the thing to agree on, not on the issues themselves.
Okay, thank you so much. That was so much, and I lost my phone to my son who's running around here. So I'm not, 1:15, oh my. Okay, we've only got through one question. Okay, well, there was a lot that was said, and a lot that I would want to sort of allow for those within the audience to also ask. But some of the things, sort of that I heard in terms of how we all are connected, and also listening to, I thought what was very important was how each of you started, because I think sometimes we think that we do not have a voice. but each of you are bringing issues that you saw happening within your communities that you used as the catalyst to move forward and look for those spaces for change. And so I think to Jean-Jacques, to your point in terms of us not necessarily all looking at the same issues, it's also recognizing that there is space for whatever we are going through to think through how we can sort of make that change that we want to see. And I also liked the idea of thinking we're all great in who we are and what is the opportunity in crisis. And I think oftentimes sort of the legacy of who we are is that we know how to operate and move forward in crisis, sometimes to our own detriment. We tend to always have a way of to keep going. And so moving into the second question, and it's interesting to hear throughout all of you that idea of class, the idea of the economy and capitalism and how it plays into our lives and how we move forward. So in thinking through that, economic hardships and systemic racial discrimination often discourage political engagement. And I think particularly we see typically when we come to campaigns that there's not a lot of civic engagement sometimes. So I'd like to know, so what strategies can be implemented to empower Black Canadians, especially those facing financial or employment insecurity, to actively participate in civic and political life? Because I think part of it is each of you are in certain roles, but in order to get into those roles, it also takes for people to be engaged to ensure that we have elected officials who also are representing our concerns, as well as those on boards within different areas. So maybe perhaps we will reverse the order. I can start with Jean-Jacques, then go to Nicole, then Sabreina, Matt, and then Sarah. And I just seeing here, yeah, we'll take this question and then start with the Q&A, or else we will not have time for everybody to engage. Okay, and if those online, if you can start queuing up your questions in the chat, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I also act as I have a small boutique consultancy, and I represent one of my current clients at the Blackhurst Cultural Center. I think it's a great kind of like case study. So the goal is to, I think what would help as a strategy is to help individuals and organizations connect the dots between the things that they'd like and how to get those things addressed. And of course, politics, and I would say more broadly, public policy, because I worked as a public policy person, right? Yes, I advise politicians, but I gotta say, with a lot of respect to those on the panel, they're not really where the change is, actually. The change is in the policymakers that have careers that are 20, 30, 40 years, right? As a policymaker, I would take ideas to the politicians, right? And sometimes they said yes. So let's work at different levels. Let's understand the system. Let's understand the constitutional order in which we are. This is not like big things. Like, we can do a workshop here at at the Harriet Tubman. I'll participate. I'm for real, right? So the constitutional order is the following. There's some things that are the responsibilities of the federal government, and there are things that are responsibilities of the province, and municipalities are creations of the province, right? So we don't need to be confused about where education is. It's a provincial matter. That's why when I'm born in Montreal and do CEGEP, I have to get my courses reviewed by the Ontario University Carleton where I went. I don't need to rage against the machine on this. I just gotta understand. That's how it works, right? So understanding the system that we're in is the first step to changing, or at least asking for changes that we'd like. Some changes are low-hanging fruits. If I go to the City of Toronto and I ask the City of Toronto policymakers or even politicians to change something that's of the order of the federal government, and they're gonna they won't actually they're not gonna give me a civics class, right? So I'm gonna get frustrated because they won't do anything, right? So we can empower ourselves through knowledge of like where we are. We can also connect the dots to understand that the things that we'd like change, where do we go for those changes? So sometimes, so I talked about the orders of government, and it's getting more specific about that. So my client, Blackhurst Cultural Center, was renting a space, still renting a space at 777 Bathurst. Please come, like a free ad for Blackhurst.
It's amazing.
It's great, right? And a newly minted Dr. Aita Sadu, who got the honorary from York last year. She's the managing director, and they need a new building, right? For 7-8 years, they were negotiating the province, and I came with the city of Toronto, sorry, and I joined their team around this time last year, actually, right? And then we understood together who to go to, how to go to them, right? So we can obtain a building from the city and obtain money from the feds to demolish and rebuild the building. And it was hard and everything, but at least we were talking to the right people, right? That cuts like 90% of the frustration, right? And so connecting the dots, and that's not a money thing, right? Connecting the dots is not a money thing. So we have institutions and we have organizations like this one, right, that can contribute to this, and I'm sure you do, right? But you can contribute to this by providing just workshops on how the system works. Like let's just find out, right, who's responsible for what, and then people can make their choices in terms of how they go to those people. So hopefully this is useful. Yeah.
It is useful because you're so supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, like you're educating us here. I was looking at the question again, and you talked about empowering Black Canadians, those facing financial and employment insecurity, to actively participate in civic and political life. And so we think about we're busy being busy. And, some people are going to go like, how can I be involved? I'm tired. I don't have time. And I say to you, either you make the time or the time will be made for you, where you lose out. And so even if it's, sharing is caring, as they say. So many people are on their social media. Sometimes we just got to get grassroots, like share stuff on your social media that matters. Find the topic that's important to you. Start educating yourself. Educate your loved ones at home. Take your children and teach them. Educate them on the political system, what it means to vote. When I hear people saying, I don't want to vote, I understand you don't want to take the lesser of the two evils, but if you take none, that is the evil. That is a choice. I get really frustrated when I think of the people who fought for us to vote and you don't want to vote. That takes me into a whole nother world. And don't just think about our prime ministers. Think about the Matthew Greens. Think about what they have to do to get where they need to go. When someone has to go into politics, we have to start removing some of these barriers and lowering these fees that you need to enter a race. Did you hear the fee to enter the race for the political leader for the Liberal Party? You get it, right? So when you start thinking about, you have somebody who is phenomenal, can really run for office, but they may not have that money sitting there, or they do not have the political capital to tap into these wealthy friends who can do the fundraisers. This is when we need to come together. Find the person that is speaking. Learn about your MPs, your MPPs, your school trustees. I remember when I was sitting on the parent council, it says grassroots is getting involved in your parent council. So it doesn't take money to get involved. It doesn't take a lot of time. Whether you have a child or you don't have a child, listen, the children are our next generation that are going to be your leaders. And if you do not equip them right now, these are the people that are going to be making the decisions about your pension and your health care. So if you don't want to get involved, what are you saying to yourself? It's as what is the vision that you want to see? What is the legacy that you want to leave? And in order to do this, you have to be, the word was intentional. And that came up. We have to be intentional about what we do. We have to create spaces where when the doc here, I just love calling him the doc, it's just so great. Working in those political rooms, sometimes we just look to those who are sitting in office, but they're gatekeepers. They're bureaucrats. They make decisions. They set policies. I've been the gatekeeper. If you don't know who the gatekeeper is, how are you going to get to Matthew? Like when you disrespecting Matthew's staff or Sarah's staff because you think they're the ones that you need to talk to, you need to be nice to everybody. I'm just giving you the grassroots things that I think everybody can do to get involved. Volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. There's so many organizations right now losing their funding. Black organizations are losing funding. That's the big conversation that's on many tables. And then when, we said at City Council and they're going to give them just 1 year funding for programs, people are fatigued. Our community is fatigued because they sign up to do a program, but it's only there for a year. And then we have staff trying to figure out if they're going to be there the next year. You have to use your voice. The data matters. So if you don't start getting involved, like people don't say, why are there unions? You better learn why they're unions, because if you don't understand why they're unions, a lot of people wouldn't be paid the way they're paid, properly taken care of, and people be continue to take advantage of. Sometimes it's just about basic education. And I'm not telling you to go get a PhD or a degree. It's not about that. It's just about being grassroots, listening to your community and what is the world we need to be in. Because if we don't do this education, we will see across the aisle, across the water, just a bridge away, somebody can just take away the rights of individuals with the stroke of a pen. So you better start speaking up, voting, and getting involved. Too many people fought for us. And I'm seeing and gentlemen, I'm not taking away from you, but I'm seeing a lot of women in the room right now. And when we talk about DEI, and I go idea because I add the accessibility piece onto it, women being in these rooms, that is a lot of where the foundation of this came from. The right to vote, the right to have a credit card, the right to have a bank account, the right to do so many things. So please don't be complacent and don't be complicit. Get involved. One action at a time, one moment at a time, and it doesn't have to be big. And I know you don't have the mic there, Ruth, so next up is Sabreina.
Thank you so much. I often make this joke when I do talks that the majority of the time, the majority of the role of the trustees is explaining to people what trustees do. And I think that's part and parcel of what I want to talk about is how the fact that the vast majority of people don't know what trustees are and the purpose of trustees, a fundamental purpose of advocating for parents and students, or a board that is responsible for advocating for parents and students. How does that in and of itself impact the way families and students interact with the education sector? I'll give you a brief because every time I ask this, I think less than 10% of the room know what trustees do. The school board trustees are elected every municipal election. So it's a 4-year cycle. And the purpose of a trustee is, one, first and foremost, to advocate for the needs of parents and students, to support with system navigation. We do a lot. We set policy direction for the school board, as well as are responsible for balancing a yearly balanced budget. Unless you're a kid or a parent or a student, no one really pays attention to what happens at the education sector. So when I think about what institutions need to do better, for me, it's about unpacking how bureaucratic these systems are, is educating, making sure that people know how to navigate the school board, how to navigate school board structures. Parents often don't know where to go when they can't talk to their teacher or the principal. What is a superintendent? What is the purpose of the trustee? How does a trustee help them navigate and address a particular situation? Because the structures of school boards mean that they are super bureaucratic. And I think about some of the barriers for parents who who are trying to navigate these institutions. I think about specifically in relation to Black students and Arab students and immigrant students. There's a weaponization of institutions like Child Protective Services. There's a weaponization of disciplinary measures, of suspensions and expulsions against families that keep parents afraid to speak up when things happen to them or to their families, right? I think about the language barriers. If a student is suspended, parents are given a letter often in a language they don't speak and don't have a chance
to advocate for their kids don't have the and aren't given access to due process because these structures are inherently in a language they don't speak or are super bureaucratic and families don't know how to navigate it. I think about some of the things that have happened at the school board level that have begun to address some of these particular challenges. And the school board now in Hamilton has a human rights impact assessment tool. The purpose of this tool is that every single time the school board is creating a policy, whatever that policy is, even if it has nothing to do with equity explicitly, it has to go through a human rights impact assessment tool. We have to understand some of the unintended consequences of this policy. Who is this policy going to impact? How do we make sure that every single student, the most marginalized student in our board, their needs are being met through in this policy that we are attempting to address? So I think a lot about, if anything, the purpose of, or one of the things I found most effective in helping families at the school board level is helping families navigate the school board, is showing parents how to look up the policy, is explaining to parents what particular procedures are when particular things happen so that families know what their rights are, to make sure that those rights aren't then being violated when things happen. Yeah, so when thinking about challenges and hardships in navigating systems, I don't know that it's fully just economic. I think it's sometimes because of how policies are weaponized and keep parents afraid. Parents afraid to navigate the school board, to be able to stand up for their kids, and to make sure that their kids can have access to a safe and equitable education system.
Thank you. You're up, Matt.
All right, I'm jumping right in. I had the chance to put a private member's bill I was working with the senator on in the comments. It's an act to amend the Bank of Canada for a dual mandate for full employment. It happens all around the world, including the United States of America, the capitalist bastion. We do have the ability to do that. And so, you know, what I don't want to take for granted is the ability to have a real critical analysis of theories of change that include where power lies. And while my brother might have suggested that power lies in the bureaucracy, as somebody who has ADMs across the table in committee, I can tell you that is absolutely, in my estimation, not where it lies. Although I would concede that it doesn't lie in elected positions. In fact, my theory of change is that it lies within the people. I believe that to be true. I believe that politicians and indeed bureaucratic staffers are very much thermometers for the public will. And the government will do the most or the least depending on the temperature that is set by the actual thermostat of power, which is the people. We've seen this time and time again where, you know, people like Doug Ford throw something against the wall, and when people push back, he goes back. We just watched it, the blink of Donald Trump on the trade wars. And so my theory of change is rooted in people. It is not rooted in identity politics. It is not rooted in finding ground with Black people who don't share my values at all. In fact, if we're to learn anything from Harriet Tubman, it's the understanding that while she freed thousands of slaves, she could have freed many more if only they understood they were slaves. And so, you know, I don't spend my time organizing with people who I don't share fundamental values with. It is a principle that I have. And so I know that there's a lot of folks who say we need to have representatives in every position, but it's been my particular experience that when we find ourselves, our people, doing the devil's work on the far right to attack DEI, IDEA, you know, anti-racism work, to attack, you know, this collectivism that we put forward, that is actually not part of uplifting anything that I'm involved in. And so I'm reminded of the age-old adage that sometimes not all skin folk are kinfolk, and I'm okay with that. And we gotta be okay with that. I don't make a habit of attacking them publicly, but I know, like in my riding, they're gonna send somebody who looks just like me from the Conservative Party to try to denigrate everything that we're creating as a movement in Hamilton. I unequivocally reject and categorically deny that I have any common ground with people who are, you know, are in that space. And I'm not saying that as any inference to my brother who's here. I'm just being very clear about what my politics are and what I want as outcomes and objectives, because I knew that when I left office at municipal government in 2018, I was the only person of color. And I know that within a few short years, we have Sister Narinder Nan, we have Sister Dahab, we have Sister Sarah Jama, and many, many more on the pipeline. So it's not about us being the firsts. It's not about the myth of meritocracy or this liberal idea that individual success equals the dismantling of these structures. No, building power is building collective power and not pulling the ladder up, actually sending it back down, sending the elevator back down to make it easier for the next generation. Thank you.
Ditto. I think just to also help everyone touch grass, the Ford government has a majority government for the second time in the history of this province. To the degree that he does, Mr. Ford has 80 people elected around, and there's 30 of the rest of us combined, whether we're independent, New Democrats, Greens, Liberals, any sort of opposing thought is shut down before it hits the floor. The Conservatives are not even at their desks to debate. This whole idea that I had of getting elected and being able to push for change with good thoughts, policy, conversation, out the window. And the impact of that is people are literally dying. In my writing, people call my office all the time talking about how they're applying for medical assistance and dying because they can't pay their rent and ODSP is not enough to live on. Like, this is a catastrophe. Not to catastrophize, but this idea that if we ask nicely enough, things are going to change. We've been saying that for as long as my short political career of like trying to get into this position of power over the last 10 years. I look young, but I'm a little old. Right? And it's just like this idea that I had of, work hard enough, like you can bring your community along, is out the window when you're in a position of power. And the Ford government literally is legislating like poverty and policy that is killing people. One of my first few weeks as an elected official, actually, it was the Liberals that stood up and said, hey, like there is a food bank in my community there's a hospice in my community where people go to die that's using a food bank because their funding was cut. The Conservatives started to stand up and laugh, like belly laughter on camera, and started saying, oh, well, if you guys didn't believe in the carbon tax, maybe they would have food. Like, I am beyond this idea that, oh, it's just political show and theater. Like, some people are okay to get into a position of power and then say, you know what, we move this small little needle along, therefore the rest of these people can die. And our communities will continue to fail if we do not look around and understand that, hey, yeah, maybe, sure, I'm able to get this one tiny needle moved in my small little silo of the world. If we continue to operate that way as Black people and leave the rest of our communities behind, even if they're not Black, sometimes I find more solidarity with the people who grew up on social assistance or community housing like I did, and they're white. Because they understand, and they do say they don't want to vote. They do say they don't want to engage. I just knocked a bunch of doors last night. And people were saying, I don't want to vote. I'm tired of everybody. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. I agree with you. There's nothing I could tell you to convince you to vote for me in this moment under the majority conservative government. I'm not going to lie and say I individually will make the change. But at least I'm going to fight for you. At least I'm going to open my mouth, even if I lose my political position. That's what it takes in this moment to inspire people to keep fighting, is at the very least putting people in positions of power that are going to open their mouth. We have to move beyond this idea that, these DEI frameworks of just like good policy is going to save us, because while we're doing that in our communities, our academic spaces, people continue to die. And so, yeah, like Matthew said, not all skin folk are kinfolk, and sometimes I do find solidarity outside of our specific Black spaces, because not everybody understands that our liberations are tied in a real sense. So when I started off this talk saying, like, I'm rooted in disability justice, that's tied to classism. What I mean is these systems are not going to save us. No matter how hard you work, you're going to end up disabled and discarded. So pay attention and work together. Because sometimes it's not just about the policy. It's what you're willing to give up along the way once you do have the power to say something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to all of you for sort of that discussion and our time. We're at 1:40, and so I think what I want to do is open it up for questions before I give my thoughts. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take questions first in the room, and then we'll take questions online if there are any. So for people in the room, if you want to raise your hand, and then I will just bring around the mic. Is anybody? Oh, okay. Get it. Okay.
Me?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can go ahead.
Hi. Hi. Thank you very much. This is wonderful. It's a great opportunity. I'm Simone Baum, and here's my colleague Eliana Kogoy, and we study. One of the groups that we study are the quilombolas of Brazil, and yeah, these communities have ancestors who were enslaved individuals. And, we talk a lot with our community partners there. And, Jean-Jacques spoke about, what are, the issues and etc. But, what's clear to us is that our community partners, they want policies. They want public policies, and they want these public bureaucrats, to be their allies. And one of the first things that their strategy is about educating this public bureaucrats. And even though they understand, systemic problems and systemic issues that need to be tackled, they are primarily involved in actions that are around occupying or liaising with these public bureaucrats in search of policies. And this is what, is their, key involvement as we speak. And I guess my question especially to Matthew Green and Sarah Jama is like, what do you think about, this search for specific policies for, particular issues, rather than, focusing more on this broader, more systemic issues and working through the institutions to attain, policy gains?
Okay, thanks. So I think what we'll do is we'll take one other question and then we'll respond. There's
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Roshan. I have two quick questions. I'll be quick. So I would like to know, potentially, what is the proposed theory of change that appreciates that people are different, right? So I may not necessarily automatically take tea with a particular person because they represent their opinions in particular ways, right? But I think at the start of the discussion, we were talking about like being in solidarity, finding those commonalities that we share on a human level. On one hand, we're like, oh, we don't take tea with these people. On the other hand, we're being asked to be humanistic and be like, oh, we're all in it together. So my question is, what's the theory of change to be cognizant that people are gonna be different and we need to find ways to win them over, right? And then the second question I have is, I'm very interested in figuring out, or currently now just like learning more about ways to bring social innovation into public institutions, right? And I am interested to hear more about, for example, the people I work with, people I study, cultural workers mainly. One of the concerns they raise often, at least in some interviews I've done, is that they don't have knowledge, right? They don't know how to do things. But that's not necessarily true because they're doing stuff, you know what I mean? So this idea of creating learning spaces for individuals who have embodied knowledge, or are a part of systems where that knowledge is embedded, how do we get social intervention into public institutions? So the first question was theory of change for people, for a bigger tent. And the second question is, how can we get some social innovation into these public institutions, tying into the question that was just asked?
okay, so we will that's 3 questions. We have one more. It's okay. We'll take this fourth, and then we'll go to the panel to respond, and then we'll look online.
Okay. I'll also be quick. I just wanted to first and foremost say thank you for bringing your son, because I think that rooms that allow children are rooms that allow women, because women do a lot of childbearing, and I always feel welcome in rooms with children. So thank you so much. I think that was great. My question was about identity politics, because it was brought up quickly. I think that identity politics began as something to say, my Blackness informs my existence, which informs my politics. Just disability may inform your existence, which informs your politics in a society. And I think like the term woke, it's been bastardized into something else that has become, you vote this way because you're Black, or you do this because you're that. And I don't want to abandon identity politics, because I think in their original form, they are useful. So I just wanted to ask, how can we maneuver within a space where identity politics has been appropriated or co-opted into something entirely different? Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So maybe why don't we start with Matt, if you want to start first, or you don't have to.
No, I'm in. I'm all in. I appreciate that. I'll start with the last question first. All politics are identity politics. And I think like Quebecois politics are identity politics. The 40-gallon cowboy hats in Calgary are identity politics. And they've been absolutely co-opted as a derogatory term. It is impossible to disconnect your lived experiences and identities from your politics. That is what informs it primarily. I want to jump right into the theory of change, because I think that might be my most important contribution. So if people are very clear that, in all the work that I've done around anti-racism, DEI, Sarah, myself, Kojo, who's running now, we all worked in this space together, in fact, in the same office. I became very clear that any theory of change has to be rooted in a working class power. It has to have direct accountability, and it has to call for systemic transformation. So that's why I wanted to be the labor critic, because I understand that strengthening labor movements, unions, having democracy in the workplace. My sister talked about cooperative housing. I believe in cooperative economies. I think it's inherent to who we are as Black peoples. We might call it different things. I don't have to quote Das Capital. In fact, socialism exists since time immemorial in our spaces. I believe that we have to challenge capitalism. And anything else is dancing around the edges, because, capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism, what we're seeing in Reza, what we're seeing, right here, those are interconnected. So there has to be an approach of international solidarity, and our approach has to confront concentrations of power. I would say, like, legislatively, to support what my sister's saying, Sarah Jama, legislative and electoral fights are tools, they're not the goal. Let's just put it out there. This election cycle is not the end, it's the beginning to forming structures of resistance that understand power structure dynamics, that pull back the veil on the Wizard of Oz, so you could see that it's just a little man behind the curtain, and that people can overcome these systems. Absent of that, there's no hope, and we're into a political nihilism. And lastly, it does regard coalition building and grassroots mobilization. So I find solidarity around values. I have solidarity around principles. I don't have loyalty to parties or people. I love my sisters. I love my brothers. I love my siblings. When they err outside of my principles, it's our work to bring them back in. When we're divergent, it's our job to stay on our principles. And so that's why, for me, an internationalist approach that is anti-colonial is important, and that you can't be anti-colonial without being anti-imperialist, and you can't be anti-imperialist without being anti-capitalist. Anything else is just kind of like not enough to meet the scale of the moment. So those are my comments, and I do appreciate getting directly into theories of change rather than falling into the pitfalls of sophistry. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And oh, sorry, I didn't mean to quell the applause. I just was going to wanting to make sure that we answered sort of the first question in terms of specifically looking at public policy, or if communities are asking directly for policy. So did you want to start, and then we can
She put the question to Math
And Sarah. Yeah, okay.
I think there's no policy that we could think of right now that hasn't been tried at some form. Policing as an example. For decades, people have been talking, since before I was born, people have been talking about policing reform. But we still look outside and people are continuing to be killed by police, or homeless people are being harassed because of mental illness. I think when we break down all our politics into understanding human rights and people's ability to exist, we don't actually disagree a lot. And we might disagree on wording or choice, but I think all of us can agree that no matter how we look at it, living conditions have gotten worse. And those of us in privileged positions are able to say, maybe like if I insert myself and create this policy or that policy, or I talk to the right person, change will be implemented. But I think that does a disservice to all of the people who have continued to try that. It takes one bad government to undo a lot of the work that has been done by the people before us. And so we're watching our rights be stripped away right now through the current government and the government to come federally. And it's like, that's the time to try to put differences aside in terms of the ways we intervene in policy. And like, I see myself as someone in politics to say, my job right now is to center the most vulnerable. So I think about, when I talk about people with disabilities, I'm talking about like some of the most vulnerable people in the Black community too, who are struggling to access services and supports, like not the people in academic spaces who maybe are looking at for various forms of big picture policy to represent them. I'm talking about like interventions to save people's livelihoods and what's possible there. And I think if we all work together on those pieces of people's material conditions, how do we get people food? What policy needs to change to get everybody food, everybody access to housing who needs it? How do we make sure we're not supporting governments or people in power who are saying if you are disabled or old, you don't get to exist, you don't get social services anymore? Like, if we take care of the most vulnerable across all of our differences, that moves everybody along, because we start to govern from a place of compassion and care. It's not about differences along political lines. Now is the time, amidst like growing hardship and struggling with the cost of living crisis right now, to say, like, when I talk about people dying, I'm not being facetious. Like, people are coming to my office as a political figure or to different bureaucratic places of intervention, and they're still being told, like, there's nothing that we can do for you. So that is the moment. We are in a moment now to put all of that shit aside and say, literally, people are dying across communities, whether you're Black, white, whatever. How do we create policy that actually gets people food, gets people housing, gets people the services that they need, and then go from there? That's how you build solidarity. And when I talk about labor, like, that's what I mean. It's been in our history, the unions fighting for like our weekends or maternity rights or those basic needs of food, shelter, and supports across communities, for those who've been left behind. So that's where I'm starting from that point. It's not to be divisive, it's to say, like, let's strip the rest of it back, the big picture ideas of what needs to change, take it back to the basic needs, and you'll find that we all agree. We all know people who are struggling right now outside of this room to get their needs met. And so I think that's the path forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the rest of the panelists on that? Okay.
I think when everything is based on a policy, and you really have to put the human factor into policies. I deal with policies all the time when I sit on these advocacy boards and stuff like that. But Matthew said it. It's people. We have to be people-centered and people-focused as you build those policies. I would encourage folks around this room to really look. And Matthew said it's co-ops. You really need to look at the co-op movement and how it was formed and why it was formed and where it was formed, because it was an answer to a lot of problems. And we sometimes move, especially in the Caribbean, especially in the African diaspora, in Brazil and stuff. We have a lot of co-ops, and it's making difference in housing and agriculture, because co-ops started in that agricultural movement. Right now in this building, we sit in where for those of you online, we're at York University. Altena Credit Union is downstairs. That's a co-op. People who cannot go and get a loan from a bank based on their policies, because of the policies of the credit union sector, people can go and get loans that they can't normally go to bigger financial institutions from. So you have to understand why they're doing it, because they do it from a human factor and they want to build. So when you look at the policies, yes, it's across the board, but people influence policies and voices influence policies from the ground up.
Okay, Sabreina, did you want to comment on that or?
I mean, I agree with everything that's already been said. I think the only thing I would add is I also think all of this work requires like deep thinking about how we show up for each other in community. What does mutual aid mean? How do we show up in non-transactional ways for each other? How do we build solidarity with each other in interpersonal ways? Because I think what we're all saying is that these systems are not taking care of us, never have, and aren't like in track to do that, right? People's material needs, people don't have the material needs they need to survive. So what is our responsibility to each other to take care of each other? And that requires a lot of deep work to think about how we all internalize capitalist ideologies of thinking just about ourselves and our own immediate circumstances and needs. But how do we deconstruct that internally and start to think about what it means to show up for each other in the most grassroots, in the most empathetic, in the most real and human ways, because these systems are not going to save us, is I think what I have to add.
Okay, thanks for that, Sabreina. So I see it's 1:57. I'm going to just go to the last question. And of course, everybody is welcome to stay around and we can chat after, because I think lunch has also just been delivered. But for the question on Zoom, it says, I am not sure what is meant when people are using the words cultural workers. This term is used in some of the books I've read, disability justice books like Care Work, but this is not a word I hear in the community where I live and organize, which is Kelowna. I'm wondering how we can also be helping our current and younger generations to appreciate the importance of labor organizing in movement work. It seems like we have moved away from this in a lot of movement work, though I do see my union at the university, the students' union, and also the staff union I belong to, are trying to be more directly involved in advancing JEDIA work policy, though often needing to have learning internally to do so well. Are you seeing strategies around this? Yeah, you guys can also read it on the screen. I'm just wondering who would, hopefully you can, if you go to,
I'm going to go ahead and defer to this one because it is outside my area of expertise.
Okay, I can't remember who used the term cultural. Oh. Yeah. Hold on. Let me just give you the mic. So just so we can say, yeah, just.
So I definitely appreciate the question and I take it in good faith, right? And also, anyways, yeah, so I take it in good faith. So cultural workers, my work, I work with people in Kingston, Jamaica, San Andres, Colombia, and Bogota, right, in Colombia as well. And it is a term that they self-identify with, people working in the cultural sectors there. And it could be as artists, it could be as people providing business services, people who are members of co-ops who are, helping each other to navigate certain spaces. So it's just kind of catch-all term, I guess, that I'm using here. But yeah, so hopefully that helps.
Okay, thanks. So to the second part, I'm wondering how we can also be helping our current and younger generations to appreciate the importance of labor organizing in movement work. I'm wondering if anybody in the panel wants to speak a little bit to that.
I'm faded. Matthew, Sabreina?
Yeah, no, look, I think young people are inherently aware of their material conditions. They can't pay for rent, they can't pay for school, they can't pay for food. They are starting to look towards unions. And in fact, I would argue that coming out of COVID, we started to see density and unionization rates of young people. I think about Lush, I think about Indigo, I think about, all these service and sales jobs where young people were saying, this is bullshit and we've had enough. And, I'm not going to let this go, but I would suggest to you that the bait and switch yo-yo on inflation with the interest rates, which by economic theory demand for high unemployment in order to bring down people's ability to spend, was in reaction to, in fact, Tiff Macklin came out and said it, which is why Unifor's president came out and said this is class war, because they understand that this was an attack on unions who fight for well-paying jobs. So young people are in a position right now to best understand the challenges they face. And what we need to do is give them tools, which is why, look, academia plays such an important role in this culture war that's happening. Setting the frame and the narrative and helping people understand in a popular way how they're connected to their material conditions is absolutely ideological, and it is absolutely political. So that's our responsibility. Our duty is to be in spaces of public education, not to tell people what they need, but to ask them the kind of questions in a Socratic method that bring them to the conclusions that they already know to be true, that there's an inherent, indefensible unfairness to this current economic system that only collective responses and a cooperative economy will overcome.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I just want to react to what's being said because, man, I hope you and I can have like a lunch if you come to Toronto. Are you in Toronto? Is he in Toronto? Hamilton. Oh my God. Well, I'll drive halfway. So I'm happy to know, and I'm at a disadvantage. I don't know the changes that you've proposed in your amendment to the Act, right? And expanding the role of the Bank of Canada may well be the right thing to do in some ways. But there are fiscal tools to address some of these issues. So I think my general point is really let's understand, and I don't pretend to myself fully understand the system, and no doubt can learn much from you, but let's understand how the system works. In some cases, we need interventions like the ones that, perhaps you're leading in terms of changing what the Act is actually enabling an institution to do, in this case, the Bank of Canada. In other cases, it's like, well, what other tools could there be, right? And so there are some fiscal tools, and maybe, right? So I think that, so my point is really just, and maybe I'll tie it to the questioner, or to the question, which is, well, we want young people to understand why some of the challenges they face emerge, and to empower them with that understanding so that they can invest in themselves, right? Because we can't do it for them, actually, right? So that they can invest in themselves, they can make the effort of engagement, right? And nothing is more exhilarating than getting involved and seeing some results that you might appreciate. That's what we all had to do, and that's what they have to do, right? But to do that, we need to provide them with the context. There's somebody in the audience saying no. So, my view is that our jobs as being some steps ahead in terms of just living, not necessarily of anything other, right, is to create safe spaces to enable, in this case, young people to understand the system better, so then they can find themselves, they can recognize themselves in the things that they want to learn more about and where they'd like to actually intervene.
And just to, I know we're running out of time, but we started late, so we're not running out of time. We're actually in time. But just to add to that piece with young people, going back to, we have to start at kindergarten. We have to start at home. Like when you start empowering, and the word empowerment is key, and identity is key. When you start getting them to trust and believe that their voice matters is key. Right now, we as adults are like, we have to be so careful when we say that things didn't work. Some things didn't work, but things worked. That's why we're in this room. So if we keep saying that things didn't work, we have to be so, language is key. Negative language is also very detrimental to how our brain absorbs information. I'm going to say this to you. Neuroplasticity, you may not think it matters of this conversation, but it does. Whatever you feed your brain feeds your mind, feeds your thoughts, and brings the outcomes. So depending on what you put in the input into young people, that's what they're going to believe. We are sitting in a situation where us as adults, we're being, dumbed down and meaning to feel like it doesn't matter. But if we keep saying it doesn't matter, we won't do anything. We have to change our conversations at home. We have to say, how do we matter? What do we need to do to make it matter? We have to believe again. If people like Harriet Tubman, who didn't have social media, who didn't have television and radio, could believe that they can get slaves over a border and free slaves, and they didn't have the lens that we have, how dare we sit in our seats and think it doesn't matter and we didn't make change? If we have a civil rights movement, when we talk about everybody talks about everybody, they saw something within themselves. They didn't know how it was going to matter. Viola Desmond didn't think she was going to be on a $10 bill. That's not why she did what she did. So if we don't look to the past and learn from our history, and I say to people when I speak in my speaking life, I say to yourselves, create that victory box. Look at the small victories of your day, of your week. Encourage your young people to see the small victories that they made throughout the day. Build their mindsets. Because if you keep living in doubt without hope, hope deferred makes a heart sick. So you better build back your hope, and you better build back the hope of young people. Because if young people no longer have hope, they will be despondent, they will stop trying. And I just want to lovingly correct a statement that was made earlier when we talked about committing suicide. I want to just change that language for you today. No one commits suicide. Committing suicide is an archaic wording it's punitive, and it means somebody it's like we saying murder. When we talk about suicide, it's death by suicide. It's something that manifests out of a mental illness. It's not a crime. So please change that wording from committed suicide. Please think about the wordings when you talk about mental health, about disorders. Somebody has a mental illness. Language matters. We are not our illnesses. We may have manifestation from our illnesses in society, but let's be cognizant that we don't talk ourselves into that and really speak life. If the last word I can say today, let's speak life into each other. Let's speak life, because the labor movement, if they weren't doing what they weren't doing, if Dr. Crystal didn't believe in what she was doing and sacrificing, and Ruth and Sarah and Sabreina and Matthew, everyone here, Jean-Jacques, if we didn't believe, and the people who've put this together today, if we didn't, the Harriet Tubman Institute, why are we fighting? Is it because we want to fight? No, we're not making a lot of money doing this. This is done out of humanity. This is done out because we believe that something different can happen. And we're doing this for the future of generations beyond us to come. So let's keep hope alive, blue sky think, and let's come together. And I like what you said. We don't have to agree. We have to understand our differences. But I think we all want something better for the world ahead. So I just say thank you that we can have this panel to make this conversation.
I think that was a beautiful way to end. Final word, summing up our time together today. I want to thank everybody for coming and participating on this panel. MP Matthew Green, Trustee Sabreina Dahab, re-electing Sarah Jama, Dr. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Miss Nicole Waldron. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us here. And I think that we've learned so much about what we can do and what we will continue to sort of put forth in our daily walks, that all of us are coming together to sort of move things and advance things forward, and it's all needed collectively. So thank you to those who stayed online, even though we're a little bit after the time. For those of you online, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to get our lunch. That is actually coming to us from a new restaurant here on campus, Afro Spice. So we are going to be having some lunch by Afro Spice restaurant today. So thank you so much to everybody, and happy Black History Month. Yes, and everybody, there's nobody to rush out. As I said, the food is here. We're all here for more conversations and discussions. So just, but this